We're reading Thoreau. Thoreau goes to Katahdin. I think it's a mountain he's going to climb or something. Page 216. Going to extremes in Thoreau. Extremes 2. Thoreau on Katahdin. Thoreau's is a walking muse. Walking muse, wrote Alcott. About this time, wind doth the anklets and rhyming her steps, the rudest and nimblest genius that has trodden our woods. He comes amidst mist and exhalations, his locks dripping with moisture in the sonorous rains of an ever-lyric day. For a year, Thoreau's walking muse led him around the widening circles of Walden. Quote, who knows who his neighbors are, he wrote that first summer. Quote, we seem to lead our human lives amid a concentric system of worlds of realm on realm, close bordering on each other, where dwell the unknown and the imagined races, and as various in degrees as our own thoughts are. Unquote. Now it was time to enlarge his circles beyond Walden, Maine. Maine had been in the back of his mind since May 1838, when he went looking for a teaching position and found an Indian pointing up the Penobscot, saying, quote, 2 or 3 miles up the river, one beautiful country. So this Indian told him to go up there. The Penobscot, Penobscot, were familiar to Thoreau. 4 groups still came south to camp on the Concord River and made baskets to sell. Penobscot by the river are by my Britons come to Rome, unquote, he'd written years before. It was time the Roman made a trip north. The Thoreaus had close ties with their Maine cousins and were always welcome there. In 1832, Henry's cousin, Rebecca Billings, had married George Thatcher, a Bangor merchant who owned timber interest up the river, who knew the country and the logging business. In 1846, spring floods scored the upper reaches of the West Branch, weakening the logging dams and strewing logs down the reverbed for many miles. Some of those logs were Thatcher's, and when he decided to travel upriver and inspect the damage for himself, he invited Henry to come along. When Henry insisted, they could hardly come so close to Mount Katahdin. Are we going to go there? Are we following in his footsteps or not? Without climbing it, an expedition was born on August 31st. This is late in the summer. August 31st, Thoreau took the railroad to Portland and the steamboat to Bangor, that last great outpost of commerce on the verge of a forest that stretched clear to Canada. At 11 a.m., the north, I've been to the north in Maine, it's like a huge forest. At 11 a.m. on September 1, Thatcher brought around a wagon and tossed in a carpet bag and his double-barreled shotgun. Thoreau added his knapsack, and they rattled out of this depot of lumber, this worn old Bangor, heading 60 miles upriver to Mattawamkeag. The Penobscot River system had been for decades a great organic machine, transforming the Maine woods, I'm talking about the Maine woods, into commercial timber. It's 250 sawmills, Thoreau had produced 200 million board feet annually. That's a lot. Their journey upriver allowed Thoreau to study this great machine from port to source. A few miles out, they stopped at the fall line in Stillwater, the region's largest concentration of lumber mills, where Thoreau first saw how the, quote, the arrowy Maine forest, unquote, was night and day, quote, looped, scarified, soaked, bleached, shaved, and slit, unquote, until it came out, quote, board, clapboards, laths, and shingles, unquote, bound for export to Boston, New Haven, and New York City. Farther up, they watched the watermen leap from log to log with their spike poles. That's a dangerous job there. Those logger guys, they jump from log to log, and they move logs down the river. Spike poles thrusting the floating logs towards the mill and occasionally getting a ducking. They stopped at the bateau factory in Old Town so Henry could see how the region's distinctive riverboats were made. Long, solid, canoe-like craft whose, quote, wildly musical name evoked the French voyageurs. From there, they took the ferry upriver past Indian Island, where the Penobscot, who once roamed freely for hundreds of miles, lived on their island reservation. The Penobscot is an Indian tribe. The town had a shabby and forlorn and cheerless look, all backside and woodshed, deserted for all Thoreau could see, except for, quote, a short, shabby washerwoman-looking Indian, unquote, who landed her canoe and, taking up a bundle of skins in one hand and an empty keg in the other, headed for the teeny grocery. Quote, here was his history written, unquote, Thoreau intoned, offended by the squalor and poverty. The political history that removed this, quote, once powerful tribe, unquote, from their lands and confined them to this teeny plot of land was at that moment beyond his caring or comprehension. All he could see was a remnant swiftly heading for, quote, extinction, unquote. Horrible. The ferry landed them in Milford. They drove up the Halton Military Road along a late summer river, all rocky shallows and rapids everywhere. Thoreau saw damage from the flood, houses overturned, great logs strewn like matchsticks still unclaimed, though each bore the owner's brand. So apparently the loggers branded their logs, right? Because your log's floating down the river or something. Thatcher kept an eye out for his own brand. Among the rest, they stayed the night at Tread's temperance house, the country's oldest settler's house. The country's. He's calling it the country's oldest settler's house, where Thoreau noted the fine, healthy orchard bearing heaps of worthless wild apples. Worthless. Why are they worthless? There's just too many of them, maybe. The next day, up country in Lincoln, they sought out an Indian guide, walking through the forest until they could see the Indian shanties on an island across the river. They borrowed a canoe, paddled over, and found Louis Neptune, quote, a small, wiry man with a puckered and wrinkled face, unquote, a respected tribal elder who had guided Emerson's brother-in-law, Charles T. Johns Jackson, state geologist, Mount Katahdin in 1837. Neptune said he and his friend were planning to leave the next day for Chesuncook to hunt moose. They're going moose hunting. What luck! Thoreau and Thatcher hired them on the spot, agreeing to meet them at McCauslin's farm by the dam on the West Branch. Thoreau teased Neptune about Pomola, the evil genius of the mountain. Maybe she wouldn't let them go up. Katahdin or Katahdin, as Thoreau spelled it, whose name meant, quote, highest land, was sacred to Neptune's people. He deflected the insult with a joke. They'd have to leave a bottle of rum on the top. He'd planted a good many, and when he returned, they were always empty. You have to leave a bottle of rum on the top. So are you going to do that? You're not going up. Do you think I should climb up it? These mountains aren't that high, and it's not like you're climbing Everest. It's just Maine after all.
Those are whole mountains.
You can be up them. I don't know how long it takes to get up, but Thoreau understood neither the insult nor the joke. Thoreau did not understand. The Indians are hard to understand. But in Lincoln, the cousins watered their horse and brought ammunition, and Thoreau sniffed at the bungling pencils they sold. After reaching the inn at Mattawakeg, they whiled away the afternoon riding up the military road. Thoreau studying the settlers' way of clearing the land. They clear-cut the trees and burned them where they fell, rolling the remains together and burning them again, then again, until nothing was left. Meanwhile, they planted potatoes and turnips between the smoldering ash heaps. Thoreau, something of a frontier farmer himself, pulled up a few potato vines and was impressed. It seemed so easy. Why didn't the starving immigrant in New York or Boston get some of this cheap land and, quote, and be as rich as he pleases, unquote? Back at the inn, he traced the newest map of Maine to bring along. It turned out to be a labyrinth of errors. Despite decades of intensive logging, most of Maine's interior had never been accurately mapped. Meanwhile, Thatcher's friends walked in, his brother-in-law Charles Lowell and Horatio Blood, whom they called Rash. Early the next morning, September 3rd, the four men shouldered their packs, leaped over the fence, and set off. Hence, the river was the road, for they left all other roads behind. Thoreau was thrilled. On either hand, quote, was a wholly uninhabited wilderness stretching to Canada, unquote. No horses, no cows, no vehicles, nothing but river and evergreen woods. Quote, here then, unquote, declared Thoreau. Quote, one could no longer accuse institutions and society, but must front the true source of evil, unquote. We read to page 219. From 216 to 219. And Thoreau goes to Maine and he climbs the mountain. You like it? And they counted the inner Indians. I think I'm going to go up there and climb it too.